Hey, what's up? It's Clayton Olson, and in today's video, I'm going to take you guys down a road that is very personal to me, and it is around death, the loss of a parent. We're going to touch on the afterlife, we're going to touch on spirituality, and my aim in this video is to give anybody who is going through an experience that is similar maybe some flexibility and a few empowering insights or ways to look at the loss of a loved one so that you can show up more courageously and face the unknown with courage and grace rather than fear and constriction. I will put a trigger warning out. If you are a staunch atheist and you don't have an open mind, you might find this video particularly triggering, and I would recommend that you watch something else on my channel, some content that might be more suited to you. But if you can approach this message and this story with an open heart and an open mind, I'd love for you to stay until the very end. You'll learn a little bit more about me and the event that has catalyzed a lot of my own personal transformation, as well as the deeper roots of why I approach topics the way that I do. So when I was 18, it was 2001. I had just turned 18 at the end of April, and my father had gotten diagnosed with terminal stage 4 lung cancer, I think in early May. Now, my dad was a really powerful, charismatic guy, but he also suffered from alcoholism and had an addiction to cigarettes. So his chain smoking finally caught up with him, and he had a mass that had accumulated really close to his heart and his upper lung that was at that point deemed inoperable by surgeons. So his only choice was radiation or chemo, which he respectfully declined because he, from what I imagine now, didn't want his last and final days to be spent feeling sick and not having any quality of life. From my perspective, what was going to happen when I turned 18 was that my parents were going to divorce. Him and my mom had a very tumultuous relationship. Even though there was a lot of love there was a lot of negative patterning. And I imagine that they would split after I turned 18 and went to college, and I would be dealing with that situation. But after his diagnosis, I think both my mom and myself were in disbelief about the diagnosis. We couldn't wrap our heads around that this was actually going to happen. And my father couldn't either. He was really in denial about it. I remember trying to confront him and confront him in a loving way and just let him know that I loved him, and that wondering if there's any messages that he had for me before he passed. And he just rejected that and said, hey, look, I'm filled with piss and vinegar. The smoke and the alcohol, it's not gonna, there's no room for anything to take hold or kill me here. If that hasn't killed me by now, I'm gonna get through this. And so he wouldn't have these conversations with me, and I wasn't gonna force it upon him, because they were really difficult conversations to have, and I really wanted to believe him. I really wanted to believe that he was gonna pull through. About 4 to 5 months later, I think we're talking maybe, it was actually about 6 months later, and to November, he caught a cold, and the cold took him down. He got a lung infection and went from a 180-pound man to a 90-pound skeleton over the course of 3 weeks. And you can imagine how intense that is for a kid at 18 to watch his father go through, to see his image of masculinity be brought down in that way, in such a humbling way. Over the course of those 3 weeks, there was a point where my dad lost all language. He couldn't speak anymore. Hospice had to come in, and they had him on Oxycontins because the pain was so intense. And he would go into these coughing fits that were so torturous that I remember praying with my mom and my aunt that he would pass and that God would take him, that the universe would take him painlessly, because it was so excruciating watching him go through this. At one point, he held up 10 fingers after he lost all language function. And we didn't know what that meant. And the next day he held up 9 fingers. And then the next day he held up 8 fingers. And it wasn't until afterwards that we realized that he was actually counting down the days to his death. And that intuitively he knew that he was going to die on day 0. And he was giving us a warning that he was, that the final countdown was beginning. I don't know how to wrap my head around that. I've never heard about that before, and it was pretty surreal to watch that happen. Around day 2, he started, he was able to muster up the strength to yell out my name. And he was yelling my name from the living room. And for me, I didn't know how to be in this situation. It was so intense watching him go down. I had no way of processing the emotions that I was feeling, and it was happening so fast. I felt like I had to be strong, but then I was weak with my friends. I felt like I should hang around the house during my dad's final days, but I couldn't bring myself to be in the house for longer than a few hours. Hospice they were complete angels coming in and taking care of him in the way that they did. I don't know how my mom and I could have handled that on our own. My mom, my aunt, and myself. So on day 2, so 2 days before his death, he's yelling my name. He's mustering up the courage or the strength to yell my name. And my mom and my aunt confront me in the kitchen, and they bring me in. They bring me aside and they say, "Hey, listen, your dad's yelling your name. You need to go in there and talk to him, or at least just like hold space and listen." So I go in there, and I remember holding his hands and making eye contact with him, and he was in this like drugged out stupor. Couldn't really say anything. He could just moan and look me in the eyes, and I could tell looking into his eyes that he was asking for forgiveness for some of the ways that he had showed up when he was drunk. And I remember in that moment that feeling into that the only thing that mattered is that I loved him regardless of his behaviors. And I told him that. I said, "I love you, and I know that the way that you acted was because of the alcoholism, and I forgive you, and I will see you again no matter what happens, and I love you and forgive you." And he melted at that point and disconnected from me and went into this just almost like daze, and then I got up and I left. 2 days later, he passed. And ironically, he passed when I just happened to get his truck. I was taking his truck to a college class. There had been a little bit of some light snow and some ice. I got stuck on this little patch of ice in a parking spot, and I couldn't get out of to come home. And he had died when I got stuck on the ice, and his body had already been taken out, ironically. I'd never gotten stuck on a patch of ice that small before. It was really ironic that that had happened. It almost was if I interpreted that he didn't want me to see him go finally, and there was some type of situation that presented itself in a way in which I got stuck. So when I finally did get home, the house, and his body had already been taken out, the house felt like a monastery. There was this, even though it was November, it felt like there was some type of breeze that was passing through the house that had this almost tender, ferocious peacefulness that just emanated through every room with the passing of his energy. And I remember my mom, my aunt, and I just in a total daze, and still in disbelief and shock that he was actually gone. that we weren't going to see him again. It's so difficult to wrap It was so difficult to wrap my head around the fact that I was not ever going to see him again in this physical form. So, 2 weeks go by, and I'm processing and handling things the best that I can. And one morning, I wake up. It's maybe 7:30 in the morning. And I get up out of bed, I'm upstairs, and I start to walk down the hallway. And suddenly all of the hair on the back of my neck goes up. And I almost feel like I go into a state of freeze. And around the corner at the end of the hallway, suddenly I see my father step out from around the corner and start walking towards me. And then he stops. And I see him and immediately burst into tears. And I say, "Dad." And he says, "Son." And I run towards him and I hug him. And he hugs me. And I remember smelling the Old Spice cologne on him that he always used to wear. And I could feel the coarseness of his beard against my cheek as we hugged. And I pulled back from him with tears in my eyes. And I said, "What are you still doing here? You're not supposed to be here." And he's like, "I can't leave yet." He's like, "I'll tell you about it." So we take a walk above the garage, this room above the garage, and we sit down on the couch together, and we have a conversation about the afterlife. That lasts about a half hour. I can't remember all of it, but I will tell you the significant pieces that I remember. I said to him, I was like, "Listen, like, have you seen Henry or Edith yet?" And he's like, "No." And he's like, "It doesn't work like that." And I said, "What do you mean it doesn't work like that?" And he's like, "I can't leave. I can't leave quite yet. Things need to be complete." And he says to me, he's like, "People think they know what death is, but they have no idea." And he winks at me. And in that moment is when he winks at me, I get this image and this feeling that it's all just a big trick. That this life and what we're living is just this big dream, this drama that we get so involved in, and then suddenly we unplug and it's like, whoa, what a ride. Like, we went and watched a movie at a show and then we walk out and we're like, holy cow, I can't believe that I felt that and laughed and cried, and that it was just another level of waking up. That's what got transmitted in just his wink. And my dad was always a bit of a smartass too, so he had this this wink that was almost mischievous with it. So at this point, I say, "Okay, when do you get to leave?" And he grabs his shirt and he's like, I have to show you something. And he leans back and he pulls his shirt up from his stomach all the way to his collarbone. And he shows me this massive scar. But it's not even a scar, it's a wound, it's a gash, a deep gash, 8 inches deep, from his collarbone all the way down to his waist. Opened up, I can see all of his organs, I can see his spinal cord, I can see this, it looks like something had been removed and taken out, and it was really gruesome. It had me shudder. I had to look away as I saw that. And then he put his shirt back down and he says to me, he's like, "I can't take the alcoholism with me." He's like, "My addictions have to be taken out of me. They have to be removed in order for me to go to the next level, or in order for me to pass." So we had a few more words, and then suddenly he breaks eye contact with me, and it's almost as if he goes into a trance, and he stands up with this intense focus, not looking at me, and he looks towards the sunroof, which is up above to the right of me. And he stands up, and I stand up with him because I'm shocked how fast he stood up, and like something big is about to happen. I can feel it. and I step away from him, and he walks over to the sunroof. And as he walks into the sunroof, a beam of light hits his head, and his whole entire body becomes the same color as the light. And from his feet all the way up to his body, they turn white, and he turns into this white goop that just melts its way up into the sunroof, fills the whole sunroof completely, and then boom, pops as he disappears. As I see this, my mind completely just shatters, and I start bawling, and I'm so afraid that I'm running in place and can't even get out of the room fast enough. And then finally I get traction, and I run down the hallway, and I jump in my bed, and I pull the covers up over my head, and I just bawl myself to sleep. I wake up maybe about an hour later, and I tentatively walk down the hallway, wondering if I'm going to see him again. And I don't. I go downstairs, I meet my mom for breakfast, and I tell her what happened. She's very open-minded. She's very spiritual. I can't exactly remember what her reply was, but about a week later, she had a very similar visitation as well, where she woke up and he was at the foot of her bed. Now, the crazy thing about this is she had told me about this visitation, and she told me about how she ended up getting into a fight with him because there were certain things that, because he was in denial about dying, that he didn't do, which set her up in a spot that hurt her financially in some ways. And so there was some unfinished business and some words back and forth between them during this time. But a few years later, I came back and I talked to her about this because I ended up moving down to Colorado. And I remember coming back and talking to her about this and bringing this back up to reminisce about these stories. And she has no recollection that this happened. It's almost as if it got wiped from her memory. So this experience with my dad and having this visitation in the morning really took its toll on my mind. I didn't know whether or not it was a dream, whether or not my brain created some really complex and coherent hallucination of my father so that I could somehow get closure with him or have this conversation. I didn't know. And I didn't know where to put this. There was no place for me to like put a box around this and put it on a shelf and be like, oh, this is what it was. And so it was a catalyst to send me into this search for what did happen. And I got into lucid dreaming at that point. I dedicated and committed myself to lucid dreaming and read a bunch of books on that. And over the next couple months, learned how to lucid dream in a really effective way. All with this burning desire to know and to have some type of contrast about whether or not what had happened was a dream. And I can tell you, after having hundreds of lucid dreams at this point and getting really good at the practice of it, that I have not had a lucid dream that ever resembled anything like the experience that I had with him that morning. So a couple things, as we wrap this up, that I want to just bring to your attention here is I felt like that experience was a massive catapult into the unknown. And what I'm realizing is that oftentimes for me, I equate understanding something with security. That if I can understand it and I can have some certainty around what I know is going to happen, I then have more security and stability. And what this experience did is it opened me up to something that there was, at the time, no way of really understanding what was going on. But somehow that uncertainty, that inexplicable nature of this event provided so much more security for me. And so it flipped this idea. Of like, how do I orient towards uncertainty? How do I orient towards the unknown? Does it make me fearful, or can it actually open me? And it, I would say, has done more of the latter. Along with my dad's passing, a couple conclusions that I finally came to was that with his passing, the thing that also died with him was this hope that he would finally love me the way that I always wanted to be loved by him, the way that I thought he should love me as a father. With his death, I realized there was no more hoping and holding onto the possibility that he was going to change, that suddenly he was going to heal and recover from the addictions and love me in a healthy way. And what that did for me is it allowed me to finally take responsibility for my own self-love, and for me to erect a father inside of me to love the little one inside of me the way that I always wanted to be loved. It put the responsibility back on my lap to be the one to no longer have an excuse and say, hey, my life is this way, or these tragic things are happening, or I'm stuck in this negative pattern because my dad didn't love me the way that he should have loved me. There was no more playing into that story. I had to take full responsibility now and create that love for myself. On the flip side of that, the other thing that I realized after his death is that the man deeply loved me in his own way. He loved me the best that he could with the resources that he had, with the life that he had, with the things that he struggled with the ways that he struggled relating to himself. He loved me so much. And it allowed me to begin to get some perspective to actually see that, and to realize that the way that he loved me was enough. And if there is any gap there, it's my responsibility to fill that with my own self-love and giving the fatherly love within me to myself that he couldn't. I think the other piece that I want to lay out here too is that some of the most painful experiences of our life can be the deepest and most powerful catalyst for growth. And what if you held on to that orientation? What if the breakup? What if the death? What if the job loss? What if the falling out with a friend, or the financial tragedy that occurs in your life? What if that is the milestone and jumping off point that is going to bring you into a more exalted version of yourself than you could ever possibly imagine? How would you orient towards pain that way? How would you orient towards suffering that way? I hope that you'd be able to turn towards adversity and turn towards devastation with more courage and grace, knowing that it is going to be the high octane jet fuel that will deliver you to a new realm of being. And that's the invitation of this video. That's the invitation of the story. My mission is to continue to connect deeply with each and every one of you in whatever way that is. Maybe that is through this YouTube channel. Maybe if you want to take it deeper, it's through one-on-one conversations, coaching calls, group programs. But it's to give you permission to begin to love yourself in a way that maybe your parents couldn't love themselves or love you. And so that you can start to create the love in your life with the people around you that you've always wanted. So if you enjoyed this video, if you want more content that is personal and revealing of my story, like it, give it a thumbs up, comment below. Any questions, any reflections are all appreciated. And thanks for being with me on this journey.